Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona where we lay our scene.
Hey, Ariba here. Today I'm going to be talking about Shakespeare's very well-known play, Romeo and Juliet, the story of two star-crossed lovers. I'm going to cover the aspects of whether the death of Romeo and Juliet was the fault of the nurse and the friar, and also whether or not either the nurse or friar deserved punishment. Also, here with us today is Susan. Say hi, Susan.
Hey everybody, it's great to be here.
Susan here will be sharing her opinions and ideas along the way regarding the topics we are covering on R and J. So let's start off with who's to blame. Romeo and Juliet loved each other so much that it led to their death. They married each other in secret and along the way ran into many problems that eventually led to their deaths. So who's to be accountable? If anyone is to be blamed aside from Romeo and Juliet themselves, it is quite evident throughout the play that Friar Lawrence played a big part in what happened to the two lovers. The first person Romeo went to when he felt he needed advice and help was the friar. Since Romeo trusted the friar so much, Juliet also believed he was trustworthy. Romeo often kept to himself, and in the play he didn't seem to share his feelings with his family members. His parents would notice he wasn't feeling well, but Romeo never talked to them much about any of his problems, or what he was feeling. Quite evidently, Romeo trusted the friar more than anyone else. The friar is old and wise. He is a friar for crying out loud, which means people look up to him. In his society and community, he is supposed to be a role model. Everyone relies on the friar to keep peace and be helpful. The first mistake Friar Lawrence made was agreeing to marry Romeo to Juliet. The friar knew about Romeo's unreasonable love with Rosaline, so when Romeo came to Friar Lawrence telling him he wanted to marry a new girl, the friar should have stuck with what he was saying to Romeo before about the tears on his cheek from crying about Rosaline not having dried yet. Friar Lawrence had a good point when he said he thought helping Romeo and Juliet marry each other might end the feuding between the Capulets and Montagues, but if he had taken into consideration how the families would feel when they found out Romeo and Juliet were married without their consent, he probably would have done differently. The friar should have spoken with Romeo and Juliet's parents about the marriage first before they got married.
Okay, alright. I think that the points you've made are very true and that the friar is to blame, but he also wasn't given much time for Romeo to think over what he had actually agreed to, so it would have been hard for him to have the time to think over his actions.
That is very true. Romeo was very eager to get married to Juliet, and the friar didn't have much time to think before getting the two married. However, his job as a friar is to help people that do take the incorrect action in situations and help them right there on the spot. This requires him to be a fast thinker. So in all honesty, he should have realized he was making a mistake. However, everyone makes mistakes, so let's just say he didn't have the time to realize what he was doing wrong. He did indeed have plenty of time after he had married the two to acknowledge what he just did. The wedding was so secretive, it was quite evident nothing good could come of that. How did he expect the two families to stop feuding if the couple was married secretly? He should have gone to their parents after they had been married and told the parents that Romeo and Juliet had been married and explained how he strongly believed the two loved each other and how their marriage was for the better. Maybe the two households would have come to terms with what had happened and worked to make things right for their children. Surely the families also trusted Friar Lawrence, so if they heard from him that Romeo and Juliet loved each other, maybe they would have understood and worked things out. The second big mistake Friar Lawrence made was giving Juliet the potion. Once again, because the friar is a trusted adult, Juliet came running to him when she found out that she was being forced to marry Paris.
I would also like to add that not only is the friar a trusted adult, but he is the one that Juliet knows Romeo trusts, and he is the one that married the two, so instinctively she's going to go to the friar for help.
Friar Lawrence has already made a big mistake marrying Romeo to Juliet, so if he doesn't still realize he made that mistake, that's a big problem. When Juliet comes running to Friar Lawrence telling him how she wants to die and not marry Paris, he should have gone with her to her parents and discussed with them what he thought about Paris and Juliet being together. He could have gone to Juliet's parents and told them that it's not right to get the two married.
He could even leave out the fact that Juliet is married to Romeo because that might make the parents upset. It would be better to tell them later after the whole marrying Paris situation is over.
That's right. At this point, there's no reason Friar Lawrence has to tell the family that Juliet is already married. He could just talk about Paris not being the right match for Juliet. However, if he wanted, it wouldn't be such a bad idea to tell the parents either. Because maybe if they see that Romeo and Juliet are already married, they won't want to get her remarried so fast. So that's what he should have done instead of giving Juliet the potion. But when he did give her the potion, he made another mistake of leaving Juliet alone unconscious. He should have stayed near her or had someone looking out for her. During this time, he had made another mistake of sending a letter to Romeo about his plan. He should not have trusted the letter to reach Romeo in time. Anything could have happened during the journey. He should have hand-delivered it himself. More importantly, like I said before, he should not have left Juliet alone during the time Romeo did not know of the plan. So overall, Friar Lawrence is to be blamed for all these mistakes he's made. Now let's talk about how the nurse is to be blamed.
The nurse? I didn't even realize the nurse had anything to do with Romeo and Juliet's death. The nurse was only looking to do what was best for Juliet.
Yes, that may be the case during the beginning of the play. The nurse was Juliet's best friend, and she only wanted to support Juliet. The nurse loved Juliet very much, and some even believed that she was more of a mother to Juliet than her own mother. Aside from Friar Lawrence, Juliet really trusted the nurse, so much so that the nurse was one of the few people that knew Juliet's love for Romeo. She was even taking part in arranging Romeo and Juliet's honeymoon. So when Juliet was told she had to marry Paris, why did the nurse support Juliet's parents and not Juliet? When the nurse did that, she broke the trust Juliet had for her. The nurse knew how much Juliet loved Romeo. The nurse knew Juliet did not want to marry Paris. When the nurse did this, she probably made Juliet feel like she had no one. Romeo was banished, her parents were forcing her to marry someone she didn't love, and the nurse betrayed her. So yes, the nurse did play a role in why Juliet killed herself. Maybe if the nurse had supported Juliet, they could have convinced her parents not to make her marry Paris. Even if she didn't help convince Juliet's parents, Juliet might have felt like she had someone, and maybe she wouldn't have had such a big breakdown. The nurse should have comforted her. That way, Juliet might not have been so inclined to go to Friar Lawrence for help.
Aside from the nurse and Friar Lawrence, I also believe that the parents of Romeo and Juliet made quite an impact that led to the death of the two lovers.
Yes, of course. Then there's the parents of the two households. Their strictness contributes to the death of Romeo and Juliet. If the families weren't so strict, maybe they could have established peace between each other before anything bad happened. The two families fought all the time, and they were warned by the prince that someone would have to pay with their lives if they kept on fighting. If only the families listened to this warning and created a truce, they could have prevented the deaths of Romeo and Juliet. The prince's threat warned the families that if they fought again, they would have to pay with their lives. Romeo and Juliet didn't die because of a fight. They died because the families were incapable of contemplating the prince's real message, which was to create peace. So the families knew there was a risk of someone being killed, even though it wasn't necessarily Romeo and Juliet at the time. So since they didn't do anything to create peace after the prince's warning, they were basically agreeing to let a family member die. Romeo's family could have helped prevent the situation by talking with him the first time they felt something was wrong. Maybe his parents could have given Romeo advice on Rosaline that could have helped him later on when he fell in love with Juliet. Or maybe even prevented him from falling in love with Juliet so fast. Juliet's family could have stopped the death of Romeo and Juliet if they hadn't rushed Juliet into marrying Paris. If Juliet's parents had taken the time to listen and see that Juliet did not love Paris at all, the outcome of Juliet's story could have been different. So now, moving on to the last part of today's discussion. Do either the nurse or Friar Lawrence deserve punishment? Truly speaking, I believe that both are subject to some sort of punishment, so a mistake like that is never made again. However, the severity of the punishment should be toned down a bit, because in reality, the nurse and the friar really cared for the well-being of Romeo and Juliet, and them knowing that they had a part in Romeo and Juliet's death already puts a lot of guilt on their shoulders. So now you have heard mine and Susan's opinions on these topics. What do you think? Do you agree or disagree with us? Is there anyone else to be blamed for the deaths of Romeo and Juliet? I'll leave those questions for all you to consider. I want to thank Susan for taking her time to come in today. I hope you all enjoyed today's discussion on Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. If you enjoyed today's talk, please check out my other discussions based on various other stories, novels, and plays. Don't forget to leave some comment suggestions and questions. Thanks again. See you next time.